I found myself within a shattered forest. The Divine Comedy, circa 1308 to 1320, Dante Alighieri. In context, focus, post-classical epic. Before 800 BC, ancient Greek poet Homer writes his epic Odyssey, which influences much of Western literature. 29 to 19 BC, the Aeneid is written in Latin by the Roman poet Virgil. It would become a modern model for Latin epics of the medieval period. After 1572, Luís de Camões' Portuguese epic poem The Lusíadas, Os Lusíadas, follows in Dante's tradition, weaving together fiction, history, and politics in a story of Portugal's voyages of discovery. 1667, the last great epic poem to be written in English, Paradise Lost by John Milton, reflects Britain's emerging role as a world power. The epic was the literary form of choice for some of antiquity's greatest poets. Epics were written to celebrate the achievements of a hero, often partly divine or possessed of exceptional strength and valor, and the stories were often allegories of transitional moments in history, such as the birth of a nation or the conquest of an enemy. For example, while Homer's Iliad is the story of the hero Achilles, it is also more importantly about the defeat of Troy by the great armies of Greece. Such poems often weave together the contemporary with the mythic, and their heroes play key roles in building civilization. Long after the fall of classical civilizations, the epic poem remained the favored literary form through which to celebrate national power. For example, English poet Edmund Spenser's 1519 epic The Faerie Queene is a paean to the ascendancy of Elizabeth I in her country, while Italian Ludovico Ariosto's Orlando Furioso, written in 1516, applauds the increasingly influential House of Este. A divine epic. Dante's The Divine Comedy fits into the post-classical epic tradition. It is long, heroic, allegorical, and often nationalistic, reflecting Dante's active role in Florentine politics. However, it is also unusual and innovative in a variety of ways. Whereas in earlier epics the omniscient narrator remained outside the story, Dante sets the narrator within the text. The book audaciously uses Tuscan vernacular language rather than traditional Latin, and Dante stretches the form of the epic by combining classical thought and mythological motifs with contemporary European philosophy and Christian symbolism. Dante takes the reader on a journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, from sin and despair to ultimate salvation, mapping out the geography of each realm in detail, evoking an almost physical reality. The work recalls many classical epics that describe journeys to the underworld, and like earlier epics, as it is an allegory. The journey through the underworld is symbolic of Dante's search for personal meaning. Originally, Dante called this poem simply the Commedia or Comedy, which at the time was a term used for works in which the difficulties and challenges faced by the protagonist were resolved in a broadly happy ending, in contrast to the classical tragedies which focused on loss and suffering. It was the 14th century poet Giovanni Boccaccio who first called the poem divine, a reflection on its spiritual content as well as the extreme beauty of its style. Politics and poetry. When Dante began writing the Divine Comedy, a work that was to take him 12 years to complete, he was already established as a poet, working in the Dolce Stil Novo, sweet new style, a movement characterized by its introspection and liberal use of metaphor and symbolism. Politics and personal passions were the subjects of his poetry, and late 13th century Italy provided plenty of inspiration. Dante himself was embroiled in the political life of his beloved Florence, which was involved, along with the rest of Italy, in struggles for power between the Church, the Pope, and the State, the Holy Roman Emperor. Key figures from these conflicts were portrayed in the Divine Comedy, and the inclusion of real people provided a degree of sensationalism that contributed to the poem's success. Dante was eventually exiled from Florence for his political allegiances, and although it greatly pained him, his removal from public affairs allowed him the distance to produce his celebrated allegory of the philosophy, morals, and beliefs of his medieval world. The Divine Comedy is structured in thirds, reflecting the significance of the number 3 in Christian theology, where it symbolizes the Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The journey comprises 3 books, Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven, each with 33 cantos, plus 1 introductory chapter to make 100 cantos in total. It is written in verse style called terza rima. an interlocking three-line rhyme scheme which is developed by Dante. Told from a first-person perspective, the work is in the form of an eschatological journey, one about death and the afterlife. The story begins in a dark forest, the symbol of sinful life on earth. Dante attempts to climb a mountain to find his way out of the forest, but his path is blocked by wild animals which represent sins. Hopeless, weak, and in need of spiritual guidance, he meets the Roman poet Virgil, who has been sent to guide him by Beatrice, the lost love of his past. For Dante, Virgil represents classical thinking, reason, and poetry. Virgil assures Dante he will achieve salvation, but only after he has journeyed through the afterlife. The two then begin their journey, starting with the descent into hell. There is no greater sorrow than to recall happiness in times of misery. The Divine Comedy. Journey to the Afterlife. The first book of the Divine Comedy describes the levels of hell and the ways in which punishments are tailored to the sins of the individuals. The souls of flatterers, for example, spend an eternity buried in excrement, a reminder of the excrement that they spoke on earth. Seducers are tormented by horned devils who crack their whips over them until they become lumps of well-beaten flesh. In his visceral descriptions of the punishments and layout of hell, Dante invites readers to reflect on their own failings, to change direction, and to live in harmony with other people and with God. When their journey to the bottommost reaches of hell is complete, Dante and Virgil begin the ascent of Mount Purgatory, with its circular terraces. Purgatory is a place for sinners who lived selfishly on earth, but showed enough remorse to offer hope for salvation. In Purgatory, they may purge themselves in preparation for entering heaven. As they climb the mountain, passing through 7 levels representing the 7 deadly sins, Dante and Virgil meet individuals painfully working to overcome the flaws that led to their sins. Proud souls, for example, carry huge stones on their backs while they learn humility. Once out of Purgatory, Beatrice takes over as Dante's guide. This is because Virgil was born before Christ and therefore could not enter the blessed realms. Beatrice can be seen as the eternal feminine guide, the heart and soul of humankind. It is she who intervenes for Dante's salvation, and through her, Dante comes to understand the love of God. Dante's legacy. Dante adapted to the form of the classical epic with its adventurer, heroes, and multiple gods to express a profound version of Christian destiny, incorporating both personal and historical events into the story. Innumerable artists and writers have been inspired by the Divine Comedy, and American-born writer T.S. Eliot described it as the highest point that poetry has ever reached or ever can reach.